Milford Museum. For those who have been here before, welcome back. For those who have not, welcome. Hopefully you'll come again. We have programs from time to time, and this is one of them. Hans has spent a lot of time researching this topic and preparing for it. He's contacted numerous people, and it really is going to be a very, very interesting program. They're taping this program. It will be on channel 77, our local television station, so hopefully you'll get a chance to catch that also on television. And again, if you have anything that you would like us to do either research on, or if you have any questions about anything, you can see us after Hans's presentation. Okay, Hans.
Good afternoon. Why did I volunteer to do this talk? The answer is very, 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 very simple. Because my lack of total knowledge of this subject. And the easiest way to learn something about it was through reading and research. My lack of knowledge was absolutely. I knew that charcoal existed, had a very light idea how it was made, but never had more information about it. The making of charcoal, or the carbonization of organic material, is also known as charring. It is literally the distillation of wood to its carbon content and was an important process for the smelting of iron ore. Because charcoal burned hotter and cleaner, it was considered superior to burning wood. It provided fuel for the furnaces at Longpont and Charlottenburg, which produced the iron, and the forges of the blacksmiths who shaped it. Despite that the pictures I am presenting were taken in the 20th century, they show how charcoal was made and produced in colonial times. They didn't have cameras at the time. Charcoal. James Ransom, in his book, Vanishing Ironworks of the Ramapo, wrote the following. In the New World, the iron could be smelted by familiar techniques, and the necessary fuel, charcoal, was close at hand. And producing charcoal, like the rest of the iron making, was a laborious work, thus even through the hilly countries of the Ramapos, where wooded terrain was always relatively close at hand. Joe Schwartz said in his paper, what was published in 2017, it is a killer, it is a savior, but it's also a trickster. It's one of the most important substances ever discovered. It is charcoal. As mentioned before, charcoal is an excellent fuel because it generates the needed heat for the blast furnace chemical reactions at the required temperature or above the 2000 degrees Fahrenheit required. These are simple definitions that I found in the internet, in this case are from Wikipedia, explaining what is charcoal. I'm not going to read it, you can read it. It's just pure carbon that comes from a vegetable origin. Carbon, it's a very old element that was known since antiquity. It is part of all human beings, of all the plants and animals that exist in this world. And it's one of the elements that has more allotropes. Allotropes are the same, it's the same carbon, but in different forms. You can find it as a charcoal, you can find it as a diamond, you can find it as anthracite, you can find it as bituminous coal, but they normally name mineral coals. We are not going to talk about them today. We are just going to be talking about charcoal itself from, in our case, vegetable origin. The ancient history of charcoal goes hand in hand with the development of the civilization. In a published paper in November 2012 Khoa Nguyen from Vietnam describes the following. 3000 BC, the first recorded use of charcoal comes from the black pigment used in European cave paintings dating from around 30,000 years ago. It is not known whether this charcoal was produced deliberately 5,500 years before BC. It is possible that the earliest use of charcoal as a fuel began over 5,500 years ago in the smelting of copper. 5,000 years BC. The first definitive evidence of man involvement with charcoal as a fuel for staying warm, cooking and broiling can be traced back to 5,000 years in the southern Europe as well as in the Middle East. 3000 BC. It is thought that the Egyptians, who were expert metal workers, may have discovered the smelting of iron using charcoal 3,000 years ago. It's interesting that they were able to smelt iron. We don't know exactly what ore or type of ore they were using, but it has been discovered that many of the tools and weapons that they had and were iron were really not from iron ore. They came from meteorites. Older techniques. The first method for producing charcoal probably involved the pit process, in which wood was slowly burned in a shallow pit covered with soil, the one on the left side. However, in many areas, this eventually gave way to the more efficient and more manageable above-ground forest kiln method. The charcoal maker, or Colliers, that's a name used in America for the charcoal makers, was a very important figure. The demand for charcoal was such that in several areas around where iron was produced, the woodlands were also stripped. This was not initially the case in the heavily wooded New Jersey highlands, and was what attracted Hudson Cleaver to the New Jersey highlands in 1764. On the right, it's a typical kiln from the Middle Ages. Colliers or charcoal makers. Charcoal was more than the black fuel that went into the furnace. It was also the largest expense of a charcoal iron furnace, and a poor management of the fuel production could stop the furnace operation. It was a key element. The collier was in many cases also the wood chopper. In connection with the iron master, he had to anticipate the wood requirements a year in advance. Wood cutting jobs were to be laid out, secure a proper yield and enough supply, and watch to protect the drying wood from mountain fires. Like many iron-making operations, charcoal making was to a certain extent governed by nature. Since optimal charcoal making conditions included dry weather and little wind, it was usually attempted from late spring to the early fall. At some furnaces, half of the workforce was in some way involved in the charcoal production. It was common that they lived alone, but sometimes with the families in small, strategically placed conical huts, 8 feet more or less in diameter and about 10 feet tall, in order to attend the kilns through close supervision of the process, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and as long as they were needed and they were charcoaling. A master collier and 1 or 2 helpers called together, working as many of 8 or 9 pits at a time. The picture in the middle is one that was taken here in West Milford in 1895. It's the only picture that we have about colliers here in our area. But in order to make charcoal, we have to have the wood. Cutting, drying, and hauling the wood was the first step. Wood consists of 3 main components: cellulose, lignin, and water. Cellulose and lignin are organic chemical compounds very rich in carbon, which will be converted into charcoal as I will explain a little bit later. Again, James Ramsden in his book, the trees themselves were cut down in the coldest months, after the sap had retreated to their roots. Wood cut in the winter months is harder and dries fast than any other season of the year, and when burned, it produces stronger and very much solid charcoal. That was Mr. Ramsden. Hardwoods like oak, ash, and hickory were the best types, but nearly any kind of trees, with exception of resinous pines, were acceptable. Aged dried wood was the best. The wood was cut in 4-length pieces and split into 2 by 4 inches widths called lapwood, like triangles, like the one we use in the fireplaces, and also cut in 4 to 7 inches pieces known as billets. But they were always cut on 4 feet long, and you remember when we're talking about a cord of wood, the pieces are always cut in 4 feet long. As an average, 2 woodcutters were able to cut 250 cords of wood in one season, yielding about 10,000 bushels of charcoal. I will explain later the size of a bushel. A cold air furnace could use to an acre of woodland a day for a normal iron smelting operation. That was the reason that in England they were running out of wood, because they were running so many iron furnaces, and England was in the need in the 1700s to import iron from Russia, from England, from Germany, from Sweden. And that's when Hasenclever thought and had the idea to start producing also here in our area. There were other people already producing iron, but they were doing it a little bit illegally because the English crown didn't want it that we were producing here iron. The following slides and process descriptions were taken mainly from the 2 booklets that they are here if you want to see them later. It's American Charcoal Making in the Area of the Cold Blast Furnace from the Hopewell Furnace National Institute, and another one from England. I had many of the slides that I will be presenting are pictures from these books and other books in order to go through the whole process. In this slide you can see cutting the wood, drying it, and hauling or transporting it to the furnace. Once they arrive at the furnace, they didn't just drop the wood. I will show you the pit where they were going to be putting those and building the kilns, but they were putting them already as a ring outside, so that when the Colliers had to start building their kiln, they were just having to take it and put it to the center, not going far away to put it in, so trying to make the work easier for them. Building the kiln. I have this in 3 slides so that it can be easier to see the pictures. Charcoal was produced using, as I mentioned, the carbonization process of dry wood in a so-called kiln or pit, a special type of oven. The Colliers built the kiln as close as possible, of course, to the wood supply. Charcoal, fuel for the friars from Corner Prairie in 1996 said, the area of hearth which in the kiln was to be constructed was cleared and leveled. The hearth was usually approximately 30 to 40 feet in diameter and slightly raised in the middle to provide drainage. The hearth had to be level to assure uniform building. On the left, he is preparing the hearth. I have found information on pits starting at diameter of not less than 8 feet, going up to 20 or 30 feet. And here it's necessary to explain that from place to place, from Europe to North America, the building and operation of a charcoal kiln is slightly different, but the charring process inside the kiln remains exactly the same. Pit or kiln is many types used instinctively. It refers to a structure as a whole, including the hearth and the pile of wood. Because normally when we speak about the pit, it's something at floor level, but they generalize, name it the pit. The first step was to place in the center of the hearth the fagan. The fagan was a green pole about 4 inches in diameter at the center of the flue or chimney. You see that here on the right side, and they were holding it first with some wood in order to be sure that they had it straight and vertical. That was a very important part of the process later on when they start burning the furnace. Here you see on the left side how woodcutters placed all the wood around the pit so that when they started building kiln itself, they just had to turn around and move it to the center. And they were starting to prepare the chimney. In the chimney, they used smaller pieces of wood in order to make a triangle around the fagan or the central pole that was going to be like the chimney, so that the fumes were able to go out through that chimney. And the pole itself was retired only to start the burning, but back immediately because it was a way that the collier was used, going on top of the pit and moving the fagan up and down. He could feel how the burning process was going. Concentric rims of lap wood and billets were placed around the chimney. The round billets were flared outward at the base to provide the proper pitch until the pile was completed. Lap wood was fitted carefully to take up the air spaces because it was cut in triangle form. The billets and the lap wood were placed so that the biased cut of the chopper's axe sloped up toward the chimney. That helped to form the final rounded and to add sloping to the finished pit. Throughout the entire operation, great care was taken to set and fit the pieces substantially together to better use of the volume, avoid many air spaces, and to prevent the pile to collapse. Between 25 to 50 cords of wood were needed for each kiln of 20 to 30 feet in diameter. A lot of wood. The chimney was then filled with kindling, small stakes or twigs, in order that they started burning quickly. And the kiln is now ready, what they named the leafing and dusting. If they would start burning it, it would be a huge bonfire, will go up, beautiful up in the air, and well, they finish with what? Ashes, no charcoal. It was necessary to finish the kiln. The covering of the kiln was an essential work to control the burn and to prevent a major bonfire, which would finish with ashes in places of charcoal. With the help of a wooden rake, the collier helped gather up scattered leaves of the forest floor. He carried them up to the head of the kiln in a collier's basket and distributed them uniformly over the pit to a depth of several inches. So they were covering the whole kiln, all the wood, with leaves, just to make it as solid as possible. And the long-handled collier shovel was used then to spread charcoal dust and mud and soil, which had been raked around the hearth, and several inches of dust were required for the sides of a last 1 foot to the head and the shoulders of the kiln. So they put a lot of soil, sometimes mud, and sometimes charcoal dust. Charcoal dust was very, very efficient because it's very fine and it was able to make a very good closing to avoid that air came into the kiln. The use of hail and soil to cover the kiln was in some areas also very common. The pit was now ready to be fired, but first I will show you the cross-section of a kiln. Here you have a little model how the kiln looks, but I will show you also some pictures. This is a typical kiln that was prepared specially as a sample. You see the chimney in the middle that was really like a triangle, and then the 3 levels of wood. Depending on the size of the pit, on the diameter, sometimes they had only 2, and sometimes they went up with 3 layers of wood. As you can see also here, this one was with 3 layers. This is a little model that Eileen Stemley from the Long Pond Iron Works prepared for the 4th graders that come every year to visit us. And so that was easy to explain them how charcoal was made. In the literature and the internet, one can find many different cross-sections of charcoal pits, depending on the area, if it was in America, or it was in Africa, or it was in Europe. It's very interesting to know that countries that had some geographical entities, that they didn't have much contact between them. They were using very similar processes to make charcoal, and they were using charcoal. At the end, all of them are similar in the way they operate during the charring or carbonization process. You can see here the fagan. In this case, it's interesting, the fagan didn't went all the way down like in other places. And here you see how the fire, when they put the fire that I will show you in the next, how they fired, they started burning inside and started moving to the sides. And that was one of the ways they were able then to control, to see if really the pit was burning the way it should be doing it, very slowly from the inside to the outside. Firing or lighting the kiln. The firing called for skill and a lot of experience. Small and light persons were selected for this work. Normally they had children for that work, to protect the kiln structure. If not kids, teenagers maybe, but small ones, were employed for the lighting. The lighting of the kiln was usually done in the evening, for it was not likely that the pit would burn through and needed additional covering until the next day afternoon. They did it intentionally to have more time before the real work started. Burning charcoal was dropped down the chimney for the lighting and the opening, and then was covered immediately with billets and dust and soil in order to protect that no air was, additional air was coming in. The air that was from the beginning inside the kiln was more than enough to make the charring process. It's a type of burning, but a very slow burning with very low quantities of air. But sometimes, if needed, during the process, they open little holes on the side, depending how knocking, smelling. They noticed that Colliers knew where the process was maybe not going the right way. So through the opening above the chimney, they put the burning charcoal and they cover it immediately. And now, as they said in one of the books I read, now starts the fun part, making the charcoal and controlling it. With the charring or carbonization process is how we get the charcoal. I will try to explain this in a few words. There are pages and pages in the literature, so it's difficult to concentrate in just a presentation like this one. During the first 24 hours, the collier had occasionally to jump the pile. This dangerous task, which required the collier to climb about the smoking mass, was to compact the kiln and assure an even burn. Look at the picture where he has a pole in the horizontal position as a safety device. He started going up and started jumping on the kiln to see how, and the pole was really, in case that there was hole, that will stop him going down deep into the kiln. Depending on the size of the kiln and the wood type, the process ran between 7 and 14 days. So they had to have supervision 24 hours. That's the reason they were living in the little hut very close, requiring round-the-clock watch for the operation. The Collier and his helpers were the ones supervising the steaming and smoking pile. Steaming because wood has water, and smoking because they were burning all the resins that they had to be taken out from the wood, to guard against blowouts that might lead to a flaming of the pile. If small blowouts occurred, the dirt and dust around the ring was used to seal them. If suddenly a little hole was there and they didn't want it to burn, that it went up in flames, they covered it immediately. The same, sometimes they had to make some holes to help a better burning. Controlling the air oxygen to the pile was a delicate matter. Too much might mean the kiln would catch fire. Too little would result in an unsatisfactory burn with bad charcoal quality. Colliers had occasionally to dig holes on the side of the cone to supplement air to the central flue for a proper draft. The temperature of the charcoal pit would reach a maximum of 750 degrees Fahrenheit, being the process an exothermic one. Exothermic means it generates its own heat to continue burning. They didn't have to add additional fire. There are several methods used by the master collier to review the advance of the process. One was using the central pole of a gun as a guide, moving it up and down. The smell and color of the smoke was another useful indicator. White smoke was an indicator of a poorly charring pit, because what it means that it's only steam that was coming out. Once the pit has charred down to the foot, it might be assumed that the fire was out and that the step of racking out the coal could be initiated. In the slides, here is when he is jumping, and then there's when they are looking through and watching the kiln to be sure that they were not having flames. The fun after 14 years ended, as they said. Now comes the fun part. But now comes a very difficult one and a critical step: dismantling and raking the kiln. The preparatory stage to the cooling and opening of the kiln was through the raking from the top down. This was a delicate and critical operation and had to be done very carefully to avoid a fire. When water was not available, that was very common that water was not available, dry dust was used to cool the pit or to extinguish any fire through suffocation. The typical way, if you are having a fire at home, sometimes you use just a blanket through suffocation to extinguish the fire. They did it here exactly with charcoal powder, dust, or with soil. That was the way to control. To avoid a major loss in case of a fire, the collier and helpers were separating the raked charcoal in smaller portions. They didn't open the whole pit and started taking everything at the same time. They were doing it in small pieces and putting them aside in different mounds around close by in order to control that they were really, the fire was extinguished. Because charcoal, sometimes you think it's not burning anymore, but still in the inside could be a little bit of fire that could then ruin the whole production. It was common to have residual burning charcoal pieces, and they had to be very careful identifying them. How was wood and charcoal measured? The wood, as we did do it still today, was exactly the same at that time. It was with a cord that was 128 cubic feet, and more or less, depending on the size of the wood, how nice and round it was weighing, and the type of wood, if it was a maple or it was another type of wood, would be between 5,500 and 6,000 pounds per cord. And charcoal was normally made by the bushel, that was weighing between 20 and 32 pounds, and they were using also the ton that was 2,000 pounds. And what's interesting, in England they use other measurements. This was the typical ones here in America. They had different types of measuring. Inclusive in England they use wooden boxes that had a very special size, but those were not used here in America. The charcoal was then loaded into wagons using the Colliers baskets. And as you can expect, the wagons varied in size from location to location, but in the literature you can find that they could hold between 100 and 300 bushels of coal. And here I found very interesting what I will tell you now. These wagons had sideboards and a bottom that would pull out for a simple and easy unloading when they arrive at the furnace, but also for emergency cases. If there's by any chance they started with some fire that was not totally extinguished in the load they were carrying, they just open it in order not to loosen and trying to work with that, because the carriers, they had to pay for the load if they lost it. With the help of that sliding door connected to the wagon floor, the load was dumped to the storage area, not damaging the charcoal. In this case, it was like a picture I will show you later. There were huge coal houses because they had to protect the charcoal because it's fragile, and in addition of being fragile, if it gets wet, does not work in the furnace either. So they had to be sure that they had the real temperature. And here is where I will show you typical charcoal. This was the type of charcoal that they obtained. These storage buildings, they were separated from the furnace also to avoid fires. And normally they had a little furnace, a little warehouse that was used, quote unquote, as a quarantine area, just to be sure that there was no remaining fire inside the charcoal. From one of the books I have here with me, I found the different type of tools that they used during the charring process or preparing the kiln. This one, the hurdles, those were, in none of the pictures we saw it, they had them as, to put them on the sides depending in windy areas where the wind was coming to block the air, because high winds could be very dangerous for the kiln and they would just destroy the kiln. So they had to protect also from the air. And then they have the different types, like the riddle here with the mesh was to separate the little pieces that then they use later on to cover and finish the kiln. In Peter Hasencleve's biography was published in 1922, he mentions in one of his letters that water and woods were abundant in the New Jersey province and were in order to maintain the operation of the iron smelting processes that he wanted to establish. He was right, but several years ahead, all the mountains in the New Jersey highlands were deforested. And there are pictures in some of that we have here in the museum and at Long Pond also, that all the hills around Long Pond and Charlottenburg, they were just cut out. There was nothing left. These two pictures are from England. But for sure, our mountains look like this after many decades of the operation of the furnaces. With the introduction of a new process for iron smelting that was using hot air in place of cold air that we had here at Longpont and Charlottenburg, they changed of using charcoal to use anthracite, a mineral coal that came from Pennsylvania. So after that, all the wood started to recuperate here again in the area. But the pictures that we have, really, they cut everything. There was nothing left. And you can see here on the left that you have the piles of wood drying in order to bring them later for charring. And that was the way it looked after they finished. If somebody is also interested, I have here the books I use as a reference when I finish my presentation. In 2006, my wife and I visited the Farga Russell in the Pyrenees. Farga means an area where they do smelting, and they do also a type of blacksmith and a forge. Farga means forge in English. This Catalan restored forge is a typical example of a workshop for producing raw iron in that region. As you can see, they had a complete system I mentioned here on the left about the woodland management, and the charcoal burners are practically the same as the one I mentioned before. And they were very smart at the time. They started cutting on one side of the woods, when going through to the other side, so to give opportunity that the woods on this area came back again. And they were using normal trees that they needed to plant new trees. The sprungs came directly from the old roots of the trees. We had a beautiful, warm reception by the staff, and we learned there a lot. It was a beautiful opportunity that we had there. This is about the wood, and here you see the kiln. It's very similar to the ones we had, very similar to the little model we have here on this side. And our idea when we visited Andorra, we were in the French Pyrenees doing some genealogy for my wife's ancestors, and says, why don't we go to Andorra? Let's see what Andorra is. A little principality in the Pyrenees between Spain and France. And when we were taking the bus, the moment we were arriving, there was a big sign, iron smelting forge or something like that. The next day, what was the first thing we did? Oh, we had to visit it. So we went there. In 2018, while touring Great Britain, we discovered the BONAWE historic furnace in Scotland. Something similar. We were in Scotland after visiting Loch Ness, and suddenly arriving to Inverness, we saw that sign. Christine saw the sign. The next day, we came back. Entering the visitor center and explaining why our interest in visiting the site, the assistant curator's first question was, your furnaces that you are referring to, were they fueled with charcoal or with coal? So it's not with charcoal, exactly like us. This broke the ice, and the visit was a great success. In the site brochure, they provided the following information. To produce 700 tons of iron per year, they needed 1,400 tons of charcoal, equivalent to 86.5 acres of woodland per year. For the furnace continuing operation of the 110 years contract, they had a contract always for 110 years, 10 years to use the land. 10,000 acres of forest had to be available for a continuous operation. And I read that the 10,000 acres was over 5,000 football fields. So they were, again, cutting and cutting and cutting. And this was the charcoal house that they had there on the left, the storage. The industrial site was established in 1753. Charlottenburg and Long Pond were established in 1765 and 1766, so very close by. That's the reason that the question was, were you using charcoal or were you using coal, mineral coal? They did a beautiful work restoring the place. Unfortunately, we would love to do it here, but we cannot. Here you find a comment of charcoal quality established by somebody in the Indian forester that was, it's a magazine. The sample of charcoal, you have it in the basket there, down there. These were all the works that I consulted, and a lot of places also in the internet. Some of them, I have copies here in my folder, and my books are there if somebody is interested in them. A lot of reading, believe me. And that's it.